Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the show where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. And joining me today is Dave Forde, Chartered Construction Manager and Consultant. Welcome Dave, good to have you back.
Yeah, good to be here.
And Ryan Hughes, founder of the Mr. Investa brand, buy-to-let experts. Welcome to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Stephen.
Good trip down?
Yeah,
Trains all working?
all working fine.
Well, that's a change, isn't it? Right. Okay. Ryan, we're going to do your question first. With new legislation likely to oblige me to allow my tenants to have pets, I understand that I can insist that insurance is put in place against pet damage. Can I decide the policy conditions and charge my tenants, or is it the tenant's responsibility to take out the policy? And if it's the tenant's responsibility, how can I be sure it meets my requirements? And what happens if I believe the cover to be inadequate?
As with all insurances, there's different tariffs, different bands, and obviously it's never going to suit the landlord in their favour. They're never going to be 100% happy with it. What I would request is that they are getting their own policy. Checking it and then going back and saying you're not happy with it isn't gonna work. You're gonna start the tenancy off on a bad foot. What I would be doing is starting out of the screening process with who has pets, who doesn't. We know rental market's very demanding. If you're cautious of having a pet in your property, you may not have the option. You may have the option to get someone without a pet to start with if you want to go that much into the detail of the insurance. But what I would be doing as a landlord anyway, all landlords I believe should have some sort of landlord insurance. Speak to them and upgrade their own policy to cover for pets, and also request it from the tenant. If the tenant's forthcoming with a basic insurance, then you covered both sides to have a pet in the property.
Right, Ryan, a couple of things there. If we just sort of push back on that a little bit. I remember watching a Gove interview and he said, oh, it's not a problem. They can either get insurance to cover for pet damage or alternatively increase the deposit. Well, my understanding is there's a legal limit to what the deposit can be. So when you get government ministers coming out with that sort of twaddle, then I worry a bit if these are the people that are actually creating the legislation.
I worry every day when I hear that sort of stuff because it doesn't. There's a lot of vote-winning comments, quick whims throughout there that aren't legal, aren't in people's both best interest, because if the tenant doesn't have adequate insurance and the landlord doesn't have adequate insurance, they're still going to come after the deposit. So it's in both people's interest to make sure, one, what that pet is, and two, that they're both covered and they're both happy to what they're entering. Because as we know, deposits have been limited, letting and management companies have been limited to how much they can have. We used to have pet deposits and then they minimize it to how much you can take. So for me, it's stupid just to throw things out there like that, because people hear it and go, oh, well, that's how it is, that's what I'll do. But really, when entering any sort of contract, whether it's with a pet, without, the landlord should always be looking at their own insurance. Worst case scenario, am I covered myself? Otherwise, you don't accept the pet and you have a property that you've got multiple options for during the screening process.
I can't remember which programme it was, but we certainly had a broker on at one stage who said actually it would be virtually impossible to get specific pet damage insurance. Is that right? Have you experienced that?
A lot of them are sort of cover of general wear and tear, scratchings, markings, but we've seen some very bad cases where people haven't let the pets out, and made a real mess of the property and unfortunately not cleaned up after the pets. So there's, again, what it actually covers and how much the policy is. Sometimes you're looking at a band of price of how much it would cover rather than exactly what it would cover.
Yeah. Yes, it's a difficult subject, isn't it? I think if I was a landlord, which I'm not, fortunately, I think I'd fidget a bit about being pushed into letting pets into any of my properties. I think I would.
We've seen a massive increase during COVID now, and the result of a lot, the increase, we've seen it on some of the animal statistics of how many people took dogs and cats for company, and obviously rightly so. But they've now got properties, pets in properties that, one, the landlord potentially didn't agree to, but two, now that pet is there.
Yeah.
So unless the landlord can request to remove it, which would obviously cause friction with the tenant and the landlord, which no one wants to do, but unless the ombudsman or the court seen it as unreasonable, they're getting rid of the pet.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I'm a great believer where you have leases. My answer to most of the problems is, why don't you just both do what the lease says? So if it says no pets, no pets. If it says you can have a pet, you can have a pet. And I don't see why we're not adult enough to arrive at that sort of situation, to be honest.
I think that's great with apartments, but some of the freehold houses, it's very difficult to sort of manage it, and that's where it's important that you have someone that's managing the property, or yourself, if you're managing your own portfolio, that you're doing frequent checks, because people will just buy a pet and not tell anyone.
Well, I know the other thing is, though, right? I mean, I've been involved in a couple of big sort of glass blocks down here, and the amount of times the management had to call RSPCA because there was obviously a stressed pet being left alone all day, no access to air because there's no balconies on that particular block. And again, the amount of, particularly with overseas tenants, abandoning the pets once they leave the property. Just leave the pet there.
Very, very, very common. We've seen it on checkouts. We've come into some very unusual cases where, all the belongings, and then you find a pet, or you see a bed and go, hold on a second, and then you hear a yapping or a meowing, and you go, hold on a second, there's still someone here. But it's it's very difficult to manage, but it's important that you do them regular inspections, and certainly on checkout. So that checkout, you should be doing the checkout. I know it's not always ideal, but if you're aware that there's a tenant in property, either yourself or your letting agent should be there on checkout to make sure, because we know you don't want to rent somewhere and rent the cost of it at the moment how it is. Last thing you want is you've got 250 people in a block, or 250 units, should I say, so maybe 400 people in a block, and then a few people have got pets and they're barking all through the night or barking all through the day whilst people work from home. And then people are out in their office.
Sure. Okay, thanks for that, Ryan. I bet you're glad you just build apartments and not manage them, eh, Dave? I mean, builders are easy to control, aren't they? I hope. Okay. Dave, your first question.
Yeah.
I'm soon to apply for planning in order to construct my first house project. So presumably this is an unqualified and inexperienced developer, really. Can the panel advise on how to select a competent builder to whom I can offer the contract? And in addition, would the panel advise that I employ an additional supervisory person to oversee the project?
Yeah, okay. So when you're taking on a project, let's say for your first time, the selection of the builder or construction company you're going to use is absolutely crucial.
Right.
So I always say to everyone that my very, very first place to look would be on the website of the Chartered Institute of Building. They have a register on there of individual companies and consultants that have achieved chartered status with that. I mean, I've got it myself personally, also my consultancy's got it. So I know the rigorous process of due diligence I had to undergo before I was awarded that status. Anyone who you find on that list will not only have gone through that process, they will also be signed up to professional code of conduct and ethics as well, that they must treat you in a fair manner, they must be transparent, honest, open in all their dealings, they must act with professionalism and integrity. So that would be my very first place to go.
And who's the arbiter of what's good and what's bad? Is it the association itself?
Yeah, so they want to look at who's actually involved in the company, what your previous projects are, what your qualifications are, what your organisational structure is. I mean, for example, they want to see all your health and safety policies. They want to see your quality management policy. They want to see your EDI policy, your training matrix, all this stuff. And then it takes a few months. You've got to provide your financial statements. You know, do you know how to actually run a company and all that? So anyone coming from there, you know, you're in safe pair of hands. After that, I'd probably look at the Federation of Master Builders. But all these other things you see online, and this is no disrespect to any builder who's on there, I just would not bother.
Well, you can buy them, can't you?
You can buy them. It's not the point. Like me, I don't even tend to go on personal recommendations, to be honest with you, because just because a company done a job for someone and it went well doesn't mean to say your one's going to go well.
No,
you know what I mean?
Quite.
So someone else who's done like a third party audit on this company, that's who I would go for.
Okay, lovely. Well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break when I'll be asking Dave and Ryan more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by Ryan Hughes and Dave Forde. Welcome back, guys. Dave, just to come back to you on that last question or your answer to it, what's the value of going to see the builder's previous works, if any?
Well, yeah, if you can go and see his previous work, all well and good. But bear in mind, it's only ever going to take you to projects that went well, you know, and you can't necessarily always go and see previous work. I mean, what you want to do, if possible, is go and see a job that he's got in progress.
No, that's interesting.
That's the best way, because not only can you see the quality of the work, how does he run the site? Like, is it nicely organised? Does it look like a professional setup, or is it just a disaster zone?
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much for that. Ryan, your second question. There are many reports in the press that buy-to-let landlords are selling up because of the impending legislation on energy and insulation requirements. However, the government suddenly scrapped this legislation, leaving many who sold up in the event for no reason. How are the panel feeling about what is obviously a disjointed and inconsistent attitude to the policy in terms of property issues? I mean, it's really quite bad, isn't it? From what I'm hearing from the agents, a lot of landlords have sold up at a discount, and then Mr. Sunak just says, "Oh, actually, we're not doing it."
I think, you know, again, winning votes, throwing things out there, being sustainable, but then actually some of the bigger companies, we've seen it in transport. Why would we change our fleet until it's, you know, necessary? Why would we go to this fuel if it's not necessary? That's exactly the same in property. People were getting prepared for upgrading their EPCs, upgrading insulation, and then all of a sudden there's a U-turn, and it's not necessarily possible, but people have exited. We know multiple people that have exited that potentially wouldn't have exited them portfolios, or certainly rotated the stock to get rid of some of the older stock that doesn't fall within that category, but were some of their best performing units. Miscommunication, again, time and time again, the changes. It's always a good one to look at the property sector and say, right, this is what we'll do. But actually, they've got to get behind it and stick to it. We're still waiting for how you can have a landlord license in certain areas and not have it across the UK. Just amazes me. But there's no one policing it. So even when the new legislations come in or are spoke about, they actually back off because they go, well, who's going to actually enforce it? Who's going to deal with it? Who's going to sign it off? Because we can't even sign off the landlord licensing nationwide, which I personally think should be a thing nationwide. Like the building charters, you know, you look on there, I want to rent from this landlord because we know the due diligence is done, we know the process is gone through. So miscommunication again, look, landlords dispose of assets for all different reasons. We know that, but disposing of an asset because the rules and regulations are potentially changing and they're not in their favour to upgrade the property, sometimes we could do without them landlords.
Yes.
Because we want them in a fit state.
I mean, Ryan, I agree with the sentiment that there may need to be a bit more regulation about letting. I mean, it's a bit like being an estate agent. If you can breathe, you can be one, can't you? And they say, well, it's true, isn't it? And same with being a landlord. If you want to be a landlord, be a landlord. All you need is a bit of money. And I'm not sure that's quite enough sometimes. But it does seem to me clear that the government are legislating on stuff that they really haven't got a handle on. Now, whether that's because they go to the wrong people for the information or the background information, and I have my views about that too. I think, the information collected needs to be very much more from the shop floor, as it were, rather than hypothetical theories and algorithms about rental habits and things like that. But I just wonder whether they really should be so hands-on with legislation in the industry. What do you think?
I mean, we've discussed it on previous programs, and unless they're putting something in place that can control it and audit it, and they've got people on the grounds in different boroughs with different clientele, different tenants, different landlords in different situations, then they shouldn't be getting involved, or they should be backing a company or two companies to roll out these programs. We find it very frustrating because, we deal with landlord to landlord sales transactions, buying and selling, and we deal with the tenants involved, and they look to us. We go to our source of information of what could be coming, and then we spend a lot of time and energy preparing for, and these landlords that, have made the improvements, have spent a lot of money. In some cases, some of the improvements can be a year's worth of rent to upgrade the policy, for the government to say, you didn't need to do that. Not just the ones that have disposed of them, because we know with stamp duty, getting a mortgage if required, solicitors, we know the cost in acquiring that property. They're actually at a loss and they don't have the asset.
And is all this contributing to the explosion in rental rates?
I think the
shortage of stock, in other words.
Yeah, I think if anything, now is more time for the legislation and the licensing of landlords to put that. No one knows if the rent's 1,200 and then they put it up to 1,600. At one point, you'd go, well, there's a certain percentage that you can only increase it each year. It's wild, wild west. You don't want to pay that rent, someone else will. Right. My rate's gone up, I'm passing it on to you. There's no control in it.
I like that. It is the Wild West, isn't it?
It really is. The lack of transparency from the industry and the government, or the government's transparency of what they're actually going to implement, or who's going to be in charge long enough to actually put these plans in place, unless it's all agreed and signed by. And that's, you're messing with not only the tenants, you're messing with the landlords, you're messing with the agents and the people in the property industry, how they prepare for the changes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Let's come back to the stable world of construction, Dave, shall we? Dave, earlier in the programme we discussed how to select a builder, and thank you for your advice on that. I'm sure that'll be well received. What I'd like to ask you now is, we have a question in from a viewer. When selecting a builder for works at my home, what advice would the panel give in terms of deposits to be paid prior to work starting? One hears so many nightmare stories about deposits being paid and no work starting at all.
All right, so this question of deposits comes up all the time. It's all about risk. So the question is work on the home. So the homeowner is thinking, if I give the builder, let's say 10 grand, I'm at risk that he doesn't come back. The builder's thinking, if I start work without a deposit, I'm at risk that I don't get paid. Right? So every piece of work should be carried out under a contract anyway. And what a contract should do, it should fairly apportion risk to the party best suited to cope with it. So this is how I would deal with it. So builder wants 10 grand off me, right? What do you want that for? To buy gear. Well, this is how I look at it. You're running a business, you should have credit accounts and all that. That's not my look at that, how you run your business, whether you got cash flow, that ain't my problem. You know what I mean? If you can't run your operation for 4 weeks, if you can't pay your men and provide gear for 1 month, you're basically insolvent, right? Now, why do I want to be in business with you anyway? But then the builder could go, listen, these are my terms and conditions. I just will not start without a deposit. Then it's up to you.
Which is the more likely scenario, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's fine. Now, me personally, because I come from the world of, the tier 1 contracting and major infrastructure, like, people don't get paid for 56 days there. Like, so, this thing about thousands of pounds up front is just like, to me, it's anathema, But I would just say, all right, mate, no problem, we can't do business, we'll go our separate ways. You say, well, what do you need this money for? And if they say, well, I need to buy this, this, and this, there's certain things you can do. You can ask for an advance payment bond, or you can ask for a vesting certificate. If he tells me he needs to order these windows because it takes 3 months for them to make, and they want the money up front, okay, great, I'll give you the money for that. You give me a vesting certificate from the company who makes them. Those windows belong to me, right? Not you. And an advance payment.
Is that what the old Remalpa clause was, that it's your property until it's paid for, in reverse with the company?
I'm not quite sure about that. But what an advance payment bond is let's say you're the builder and you say, I want 100 grand up front. And I go, all right, you give me an advance payment bond. So you, the builder, would go to an insurance company. They would typically charge you about 2.5%, right? So you'd pay them 2.5 grand. They would then give me the bond. If you default on our agreement, the insurance company pays me out.
Okay. Well, that sounds pretty fair. As you say, it's an allocation of risk, isn't it? And what's reasonable and proper. Just very quickly, out of interest, would it be the smaller builder or the larger builder that would take the view, well, okay, I'll do it without a deposit?
It'd probably be the larger builder, and for the reason that a proper professional setup from a builder, we always hear that you should do due diligence on the builder. The builder's doing it on you. Right. So if you're saying I've got 100 grand project here, he might ask to see, have you actually got it? Show me it, Yeah. So he'd probably be a bit more willing to start without a deposit.
And a bit more professional about it, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you both very much indeed. So Dave Forde, Chartered Construction Manager and Consultant. Ryan Hughes, founder of Mr. Investa. Thank you both very much for coming in today. Very useful information. I'm sure our viewers are most grateful. I'm Stephen Galpin. I look forward to seeing you next time on Property Question Time. See you then.